The ancient grandfather clock in the library of Ashworth House had not missed a single chime in over 2 centuries, its steady voice marking the passage of time through generations of the Blackwood family. Yet on that fog-shrouded evening in late November, as the last guests gathered for what would prove to be a most extraordinary dinner party, the venerable timepiece would bear witness to something far more sinister than the mere passage of hours. Sir Montague Blackwood, the master of Ashworth House, was a man who collected both antique timepieces and enemies with equal enthusiasm. His fortune, built upon a series of shrewd business dealings that had enriched him while impoverishing others, had afforded him the luxury of indulging both passions. The library, his private sanctuary, housed the crown jewel of his horological collection, a magnificent astronomical clock crafted by the master clockmaker Abraham Louis Breguet in 1810. This mechanical marvel not only told the time, but tracked the phases of the moon, the positions of the planets, and the intricate dance of celestial bodies across the heavens. The dinner party that evening had been arranged ostensibly to celebrate Sir Montague's acquisition of this extraordinary timepiece, though those familiar with his character suspected more complex motives. The guest list read like a catalogue of individuals who had reason to harbour grievances against their host, each nursing wounds inflicted by Sir Montague's ruthless business practices or social machinations. Lady Vivian Blackwood, Sir Montague's second wife and 20 years his junior, presided over the evening's festivities with the practised grace of one accustomed to concealing her true feelings. Her marriage to Sir Montague had rescued her from genteel poverty, but had cost her the love of Captain James Hartwell, the dashing cavalry officer who had been unable to compete with the Blackwood fortune. Captain Hartwell, recently returned from India with his military career in ruins due to certain financial irregularities, now found himself among the evening's guests, a cruel twist that Sir Montague seemed to relish. Mr. Reginald Ashworth, Sir Montague's nephew and presumptive heir, occupied his customary position near the fireplace, his weak chin and nervous disposition marking him as a man ill-suited to inherit the family's considerable holdings. His wife, the former Miss Constance Fairfax, possessed the kind of sharp intelligence that her husband lacked, though she had learned to disguise her capabilities behind a facade of feminine helplessness. Their precarious financial situation, the result of Reginald's unfortunate gambling habits, made them entirely dependent upon Sir Montague's continued goodwill. The most intriguing guest was undoubtedly Mr. Adrian Pemberton, the renowned antiquarian and expert on mechanical timepieces, whose professional assessment of the Breguet clock had been solicited by Sir Montague. Mr. Pemberton's reputation for absolute honesty in matters of authentication had made him both invaluable and dangerous to collectors who valued their acquisitions more for their prestige than their provenance. His presence suggested that Sir Montague intended to make some significant announcement regarding his latest acquisition. Dr. Marcus Thornfield, the family physician, completed the intimate gathering. A man of science who had served the Blackwood family for over 3 decades, Dr. Thornfield possessed knowledge of family secrets that extended far beyond mere medical confidences. His recent financial difficulties, stemming from unwise investments in a mining venture that Sir Montague had deliberately undermined, had placed him in an increasingly uncomfortable position of dependence upon his longtime patient. As the evening progressed, Sir Montague's behavior became increasingly erratic. During dinner, he had made several pointed references to revelations and long-overdue justice, comments that had cast a pall over the already strained conversation. When the ladies withdrew to the drawing-room, he announced his intention to demonstrate the remarkable capabilities of the Breguet clock to the gentlemen, inviting them to join him in the library for brandy and cigars. It was precisely at 9:47 that the household was startled by a tremendous crash from the direction of the library, followed by an ominous silence that seemed to stretch into eternity. When the butler, old Matthews, finally summoned the courage to investigate, he found the library door locked from the inside. The key, he informed the increasingly agitated gathering, was kept on Sir Montague's personal key-ring and never removed from his possession. The French windows that opened onto the terrace were similarly secured, their heavy curtains drawn against the November chill. It was Captain Hartwell who finally took charge, directing the footman to force the library door while Dr. Thornfield prepared his medical bag with the grim efficiency of a man who suspected his services would be required for more than a social call. The scene that greeted them defied immediate comprehension. Sir Montague lay sprawled beside his precious Breguet clock, which had toppled from its place of honor on the central table and now lay in ruins upon the Persian carpet. The astronomical mechanism, so carefully calibrated to track the movement of celestial bodies, would never again mark the passage of time. More disturbing still was the discovery that every timepiece in the room, and indeed, as they would later discover, throughout the entire house, had stopped at precisely 9:47. Sir Montague himself presented the appearance of a man who had suffered a massive apoplectic fit, his face contorted in an expression of surprise and rage. Yet Dr. Thornfield's preliminary examination revealed no obvious signs of natural death, and the peculiar sweet odor that hung in the air suggested something far more sinister than a simple stroke. As the local constabulary was summoned and the guests confined to the house, the true magnitude of the mystery began to emerge. The library had been locked from the inside, with no possible means of entry or exit save through the door that had required forcing. The French windows remained securely latched, their seals unbroken by the evening's fog. The chimney, though large enough in principle to accommodate a person, was blocked by a fire that had been burning steadily throughout the evening, its ashes still warm to the touch. Most perplexing of all was the matter of the stopped clocks. Every timepiece in Ashworth House, from the grandest long case clock in the entrance hall to the smallest pocket watch in the servants' quarters, had ceased its function at the exact moment of Sir Montague's death. The phenomenon defied rational explanation, lending an almost supernatural quality to what was clearly a case of deliberate murder. Inspector Morrison of the local constabulary, a competent if unimaginative man, found himself confronted with a crime that seemed to transcend the boundaries of physical possibility. The locked room, the stopped clocks, and the absence of any obvious murder weapon combined to create a puzzle that would have challenged even the most experienced investigator. It was Lady Vivian who, with remarkable presence of mind for a newly widowed woman, suggested that the services of a certain Belgian detective might prove invaluable in unraveling the mystery. As the fog continued to swirl around Ashworth House and the stopped clocks maintained their eerie silence, a telegram was dispatched to London requesting the immediate assistance of Monsieur Hercule Poirot. The message, composed with Lady Vivian's characteristic precision, was brief but compelling. Impossible murder at Country House. Room locked from inside. All clocks stopped at moment of death. Your expertise urgently required. Lady V. Blackwood, Ashworth House, Surrey. The response, when it came some hours later, was equally concise but infinitely reassuring. Arriving tomorrow morning train. Prepare detailed guest list and house plans. Allow nothing to be disturbed. H. Poirot. And so, as the first pale light of dawn began to penetrate the November gloom, the stage was set for one of the most challenging cases in the career of the world's greatest detective. In the library of Ashworth House, surrounded by the silent sentinels of stopped timepieces, lay the body of Sir Montague Blackwood and the key to a mystery that would test even Hercule Poirot's legendary powers of deduction. The room where time stopped awaited its investigator, and with him the restoration of both justice and the natural order of things. The morning train from London discharged its passengers with customary punctuality, though Hercule Poirot, descending from the first-class carriage with his characteristic precision, was less concerned with railway schedules than with the temporal impossibility that had summoned him to Surrey. The hired motor car wound through fog-shrouded lanes toward Ashworth House, and Poirot found himself contemplating the curious detail that had been mentioned almost as an afterthought in Lady Vivian's telegram. Every clock in the house had stopped at the precise moment of Sir Montague's death. "Most interesting," murmured Poirot, adjusting his moustache with the gesture that invariably accompanied his deepest reflections. When many timepieces cease their function simultaneously, it is rarely the work of coincidence, but rather of human design. Ashworth House materialized through the morning mist like something from a Gothic romance, its Tudor facade lending an air of brooding antiquity that seemed entirely appropriate to the mystery within. Lady Vivian Blackwood awaited him at the entrance, her black mourning dress impeccably chosen to convey both grief and dignity. Here, Poirot observed, was a woman who understood the importance of maintaining proper appearances even in the midst of personal catastrophe. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, extending a gloved hand with precisely the correct degree of restrained emotion. "I cannot adequately express our gratitude for your prompt response. Inspector Morrison is undoubtedly competent, but this case requires particular expertise." Poirot bowed with continental courtesy. "Madame, you have acted with admirable wisdom. A locked room, stopped clocks, and a dead man. Here we have all the elements of a most fascinating puzzle. But tell me, has anything been disturbed since last evening?" "Nothing whatsoever. I gave strict instructions that the library remain exactly as we found it." As they entered the house, Poirot's trained eye catalogued every significant detail. The grandfather clock in the entrance hall stood silent, its pendulum motionless. A delicate bracket clock on the console table had likewise ceased its function, and when Poirot examined it closely, he detected the faint smear of a fingertip on the polished case. Someone had touched this timepiece recently, perhaps to ensure its silence. "Curious," he murmured, producing his pocket watch to verify the time. "The clocks, they do not suffer from mechanical failure, but from deliberate intervention." The assembled household presented a tableau of barely contained anxiety. Captain Hartwell hovered near the morning-room door with the restless energy of a man prepared for immediate flight. Mr. Reginald Ashworth clutched his wife's arm with barely concealed desperation, while Mrs. Constance Ashworth watched the proceedings with sharp intelligence poorly disguised behind feminine helplessness. Dr. Thornfield maintained professional composure, though his eyes frequently strayed toward the sealed library door. Mr. Pemberton, the antiquarian, seemed more concerned with the fate of the destroyed timepiece than with the deceased collector. "Before we proceed to formal interviews," Poirot announced, "I must examine the scene of this impossible crime." Lady Vivian led him through corridors lined with portraits of long-dead Blackwoods toward the library. The door stood open now, revealing a scene of carefully preserved chaos. The fallen Breguet clock dominated the center of the room, its intricate mechanism scattered across the Persian carpet like the fragmented thoughts of a brilliant mind suddenly silenced. Poirot approached the timepiece with reverence, his practiced fingers hovering over the delicate components without quite touching them. "Magnificent craftsmanship," he observed. "Yet observe, madame, this destruction was not accidental. The damage pattern suggests deliberate dismantling rather than a simple fall." Moving with methodical precision, Poirot examined every aspect of the locked room. The sealed French windows showed no disturbance to their dust-laden sills. The fireplace contained warm ashes from a fire that had burned throughout the evening, making the chimney impassable. The door had indeed required forcing, its lock intact and functioning. Near the fallen clock, Poirot discovered a small dark thread caught on the table's carved molding. Wool, expensive, recently torn. On the side table, a brandy decanter stood beside two glasses, one clean, one bearing the residue of recent use. The sweet odor that Dr. Thornfield had detected still lingered faintly in the air, though Poirot noted it seemed strongest near the destroyed timepiece rather than the body. "Inspector Morrison," Poirot said, straightening his waistcoat, We shall proceed systematically. First, I will interview Lady Vivian privately. Then Mr. Pemberton, whose expertise with timepieces may prove illuminating. The others must remain available, but they are not to discuss the case among themselves. He paused at the library's mantelpiece, where a small carriage clock sat frozen at 9:47. Unlike the others, this timepiece showed signs of having been wound recently. The key still protruded slightly from its housing. Most instructive, Poirot murmured. Someone wished us to believe that time itself had stopped, but they have been careless with the details. The solution to this mystery lies not in supernatural intervention, but in the very human emotions of greed, revenge, and desperation. As he prepared to begin his interviews, Poirot reflected that the stopped clocks, far from being an impossible phenomenon, were merely an elaborate stage setting designed to obscure a very clever, very human murder. The morning room at Ashworth House provided the perfect setting for Poirot's methodical approach to unraveling human nature. Lady Vivian Blackwood entered with the practiced grace of a woman accustomed to maintaining perfect composure under scrutiny, though Poirot's keen eye detected the slight tremor in her gloved hands, a detail that spoke volumes about the strain beneath her carefully constructed facade. "Madame," Poirot began, settling into his chair with characteristic precision, "your presence of mind in this crisis has been remarkable. Many widows would be prostrate with grief, yet you have managed the household with admirable efficiency." "Grief is a luxury one cannot always afford, Monsieur Poirot," she replied, her voice carrying the controlled modulation of someone who had rehearsed this response. "My husband's affairs require immediate attention, and there are obligations to consider." "Indeed. Yet I observe that your marriage to Sir Montague was perhaps built upon practical considerations rather than romantic sentiment." Lady Vivian's composure flickered momentarily. "My husband was a complex man with extensive business interests. Our relationship was founded upon mutual respect and understanding." Poirot noted the diplomatic evasion. "And Captain Hartwell, he was, I understand, an acquaintance from your earlier years." The question struck its target with precision. "Captain Hartwell and I were once close. That was before circumstances required me to make more practical considerations in marriage." The pain beneath her words was carefully suppressed, but unmistakable. "Ah, yes. Your family's financial difficulties, which Sir Montague's proposal resolved so conveniently." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, madame, what was your husband's mood yesterday evening?" Montague was unusually animated during dinner. He made several cryptic references to revelations and justice, though he refused to elaborate when pressed. He seemed to anticipate some great triumph. "And after dinner, when the gentlemen retired to the library?" "I went to the drawing-room with Mrs. Ashworth. We were discussing the Christmas charity arrangements when we heard the crash. Perhaps 20 minutes had elapsed since the men departed." "The brandy glasses in the library. Your husband entertained someone privately." Lady Vivian hesitated. "Montague often poured for his guests. I cannot say who might have joined him last evening." "The library key? It remained always in your husband's possession?" "Always. On his personal key ring, which Inspector Morrison found in his pocket." Poirot dismissed Lady Vivian with courteous thanks and summoned Mr. Adrian Pemberton. The antiquarian entered with nervous energy, his spectacles catching the morning light as he adjusted them repeatedly. "Mr. Pemberton," Poirot began, "your expertise with mechanical timepieces is renowned. Sir Montague engaged your services to authenticate his recent acquisition." "Indeed, yes. The Breguet astronomical clock was a remarkable specimen, if genuine." Pemberton's academic enthusiasm overcame his nervousness. Sir Montague was most eager to have its authenticity confirmed publicly. "You say, if genuine. Did you harbor doubts?" Pemberton's scholarly integrity warred with professional discretion. "I had completed my preliminary examination and discovered certain irregularities. The craftsmanship was consistent with the period, but the provenance documentation was questionable." "Your intended verdict?" I had concluded that while the timepiece was indeed magnificent, it was not the work of Abraham Louis Breguet himself, but rather a talented contemporary imitator. The revelation would have cost Sir Montague considerable embarrassment and financial loss. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And Sir Montague's planned announcement? He intended to present my authentication publicly, assuming it would confirm his triumph. I had arranged to discuss my actual findings privately afterward. Such revelations require delicate handling. The financial implications? Pemberton blanched. Devastating. The value depends entirely on undisputed attribution. If its authenticity were questioned, the piece would lose most of its worth. Sir Montague would have been furious. He despised being wrong almost as much as losing money. Most illuminating. During your examination yesterday evening, did you notice the sweet odor that lingered in the library? No, Monsieur Poirot. My oils have no such scent. What I detected after the door was forced reminded me of ether, or perhaps a medical tincture. As Pemberton departed, Poirot reflected on the emerging pattern. The stopped clocks, the locked room, the destroyed timepiece, all elements in an elaborate deception designed to conceal a very human murder motivated by greed, desperation, and the fear of exposure. Captain James Hartwell entered the morning room with the rigid bearing of a military man accustomed to facing court-martial proceedings, though Poirot's trained eye immediately detected the telltale signs of a soul under siege. The captain's uniform, while impeccably maintained, bore the subtle marks of a man forced to economize, a button replaced with one of slightly different hue, a cuff expertly mended where the fabric had worn thin. Captain, Poirot began with characteristic courtesy, your recent return from India has been, I understand, under circumstances less than ideal. 3 months ago, Monsieur Poirot. Hartwell's voice carried the clipped precision of military training, though beneath it lay a weariness that spoke of battles lost both on distant frontiers and in drawing rooms closer to home. Certain financial irregularities in my regiment required my resignation from Her Majesty's service. Ah, yes. And these irregularities, they were perhaps brought to the attention of your superiors by someone with intimate knowledge of your circumstances? The captain's jaw tightened perceptibly, confirming Poirot's suspicion. Sir Montague possessed a remarkable talent for discovering the weaknesses of those around him. He took particular pleasure in sharing such discoveries with interested parties, including, perhaps, the knowledge that your engagement to the present Lady Vivian had been terminated due to your family's financial reverses. The question struck with devastating accuracy. Captain Hartwell's military composure cracked momentarily, revealing the raw anguish beneath. Vivian and I were to be married. That was before circumstances made such a union impossible, and Sir Montague's timely intervention provided her with a more practical alternative. Yesterday evening, after dinner, you accompanied the gentleman to the library. Initially, yes. Sir Montague was eager to demonstrate his precious Breguet clock, explaining its various astronomical functions with considerable pride. After perhaps 10 minutes, he dismissed all but one of us, saying he had private business to conduct. Poirot's eyes sharpened with interest. One person remained. You observed who? In the confusion of departure, I cannot say with certainty. We were all moving toward the door when Sir Montague made his announcement. And your movements during the crucial 20 minutes that followed? Captain Hartwell hesitated, his training warring with personal discretion. I stepped onto the terrace for fresh air. The evening had become oppressive, and I encountered Mrs. Ashworth taking a similar constitutional in the garden. As Hartwell departed with military precision, Poirot made his way back to the library, where the morning light revealed details that had escaped notice in the previous evening's confusion. Kneeling beside the fallen Breguet clock, he discovered a small sliver of glass beneath one of the scattered gears, its surface bearing a faint medicinal odor that reminded him of the ether used in surgical procedures. On the central table's carved moulding, a dark thread of expensive wool clung to a splinter, recently torn, suggesting a hasty movement or struggle. The brandy service told its own story. 2 glasses, one bearing the residue of recent use, the other clean but bearing fingerprints on its base, as if hastily set down. Most intriguing was the carriage clock on the mantelpiece, its winding key protruding awkwardly from its housing, bearing a smear across the brass that spoke of unpracticed hands attempting to manipulate its mechanism. Returning to the morning room, Poirot summoned Mr. Reginald Ashworth, who entered with the nervous energy of a man expecting execution. His hands fidgeted ceaselessly, and his gaze darted about the room as if seeking escape routes. "Mr. Ashworth," Poirot began gently, "your uncle was a man who valued control, was he not?" "Indeed, Monsieur Poirot," Reginald mumbled, barely meeting the detective's eyes. "He held the purse strings, you see. My inheritance depends upon certain conditions, and my gambling has created complications." "Your uncle threatened disinheritance?" The question struck like a physical blow. Reginald flushed crimson. "He said he would make an announcement last night about my reckless expenditures and his disappointment in my character. He delighted in such humiliations." "Where were you when the crash occurred?" "With the other gentleman initially, then in the drawing-room when Sir Montague dismissed us. The crash came perhaps 20 minutes later. Mrs. Constance Ashworth entered with far greater self-possession than her husband, her intelligent gaze assessing Poirot with the shrewdness of one accustomed to managing difficult situations through careful observation and strategic thinking. "Mrs. Ashworth," Poirot observed, "you bear this tragedy with remarkable composure." "Someone must maintain clarity, Monsieur Poirot." She replied with a slight sigh. "My husband is rather delicate in such matters." "Your financial situation made you vulnerable to Sir Montague's whims. He enjoyed wielding power over those dependent upon him. Reginald's gambling provided him with considerable leverage, and he had intimated that public disinheritance was imminent. Captain Hartwell mentioned encountering you in the garden during the crucial period." A flicker of something, calculation perhaps, crossed her features. "I required fresh air. The atmosphere had become oppressive, and I needed to think clearly about our situation." As Mrs. Ashworth departed, Poirot reflected on the emerging pattern. The stopped clocks, the locked room, the carefully placed evidence, all suggested a mind capable of elaborate deception, yet the small imperfections in execution revealed the human hand behind the apparent impossibility. Dr. Marcus Thornfield entered the morning room with the measured precision of a man who had spent 3 decades managing medical crises. Yet Poirot's trained eye immediately detected the subtle tremor in his hands, and the faint chemical odor that clung to his person despite obvious attempts at concealment. His medical bag remained clutched defensively, as if it contained secrets he feared might be discovered. "Doctor," Poirot began with characteristic courtesy, "your examination of Sir Montague revealed what conclusions?" The facial expression suggested sudden shock, but I detected no obvious cause of death, no signs of apoplexy or cardiac distress. Most peculiar was the sweet medicinal odor lingering about the body, reminiscent of chloroform or a concentrated ether solution. Thornfield's professional composure wavered slightly as he continued. "Substances with which I am, naturally, quite familiar in my medical practice." "Ah, yes. And your pharmacological supplies, they remain intact?" The question struck with surgical precision. Dr. Thornfield's careful facade cracked, revealing the desperation beneath. "I must confess, Monsieur Poirot, that upon inventory this morning I discovered 1 ampule of chloroform solution missing from my medical case. The implications are unfortunate. Your financial difficulties with Sir Montague, they provided him with considerable leverage over your professional reputation?" "Absolute power," Thornfield admitted bitterly. "The mining venture he encouraged me to pursue proved catastrophic. When I later, discovered he had secretly orchestrated its failure. While acquiring my investments at ruinous prices, I realized the full extent of his manipulation. He held mortgages on my practice, my home, everything. Last evening, he hinted at revelations that would permanently reshape our professional relationship. As Dr. Thornfield departed, Poirot returned to the library for another meticulous examination. Kneeling beside the fallen Breguet clock, he discovered the small glass fragment he had noted earlier, clearly from a medical ampule, its jagged edge bearing the same sweet scent that had permeated the room. Hidden beneath the Persian carpet, his searching fingers located a small brass key, its size and design suggesting it belonged to a timepiece mechanism. Near the fireplace, a partially burned fragment of paper had escaped the flames. Though barely legible, Poirot could discern the words "authentication report" and what appeared to be yesterday's date. Someone had attempted to destroy documentary evidence, though their efforts had been incomplete. Inspector Morrison's arrival interrupted these discoveries, his face flushed with the satisfaction of a man who believed he had solved an impossible puzzle. "Monsieur Poirot," he announced with obvious pride, "we have our murderer. Dr. Thornfield has confessed to possessing the murder weapon, chloroform, and admits it's missing from his supplies. His financial ruin at Sir Montague's hands provides clear motive." "The locked room presents no difficulty," Morrison continued enthusiastically. As a medical man, Thornfield could have administered the chloroform quickly, then secured the door from inside before concealing the key on the body. The stopped clocks were merely theatrical misdirection, something a man of science might devise to confuse the investigation. Poirot listened with the patient attention he reserved for enthusiastic but misguided officials. "Your theory possesses a certain elegance, Inspector. Yet permit me to observe certain inconsistencies, such as chloroform is highly volatile. It dissipates rapidly in open air. To linger so distinctly after many hours would require either massive quantities or a very confined application. Moreover, observe the destruction of the Breguet clock. This suggests violent struggle, not the quiet collapse of a chloroformed victim." Poirot indicated the scattered mechanism. "The damage pattern shows systematic dismantling rather than accidental destruction. Someone searched within the clock's housing, perhaps for concealed documents. Note also this brass key hidden beneath the carpet. It belongs to no lock in this room, but rather to a timepiece mechanism. Furthermore," Poirot continued, producing the glass fragment, "this ampule was broken deliberately near the clock, not administered to the victim. The sweet odor concentrates here, not near the brandy service where Sir Montague would have been seated." Morrison's confidence wavered. "Then how do you explain the missing chloroform?" "The same way I explain the stopped clocks, mon ami. Our murderer required props for an elaborate deception. The chloroform created the mysterious odor. The broken ampule provided physical evidence, and the stopped timepieces suggested supernatural intervention, all designed to obscure very human motives. But the locked room presents no impossibility to one who understands the mechanism involved. Observe the carriage clock on the mantelpiece. Its winding key protrudes awkwardly, bearing oil smears from unpracticed fingers. Someone manipulated these timepieces manually, stopping each at precisely 9:47 to create the illusion of temporal impossibility." Poirot straightened his waistcoat with characteristic precision. "Dr. Thornfield possesses motive and means, certainly. But he is a man of scientific precision, not theatrical gesture. Our murderer reveals themselves through preference for elaborate staging over simple efficiency. They could not resist the drama of stopped time, yet betrayed themselves through small mechanical imperfections." As afternoon shadows lengthened across Ashworth House, Poirot reflected that the truth lay not in obvious suspects or convenient evidence, but in understanding the psychology that demanded such elaborate deception to conceal a fundamentally simple crime of greed and desperation. The afternoon light filtering through Ashworth House's mullioned windows cast long shadows as Poirot contemplated the psychological architecture of the crime before him. Inspector Morrison's eagerness to arrest Dr. Thornfield had revealed the fundamental flaw in conventional detection, the tendency to seize upon obvious motives while ignoring the theatrical soul that demanded such elaborate staging. "Inspector," Poirot announced with characteristic precision, "permit me to demonstrate why our murderer reveals themselves not through confession, but through character. I propose to conduct a small experiment." Within the hour, Poirot had assembled the household in the library, positioning each person precisely where they claimed to have been during the crucial 20 minutes following dinner. The fallen Breguet clock dominated the scene like a mechanical corpse, its scattered components catching the afternoon light with accusatory gleams. "Observe," Poirot began, approaching the mantelpiece carriage clock with theatrical deliberation, "how our murderer manipulated these timepieces to create their impossible crime. Each of you will demonstrate at my signal how you would naturally stop this clock. Nothing dangerous, merely your instinct speaking." He wound the clock until its steady ticking resumed, then handed Mr. Pemberton a handkerchief to shield the brass mechanism. The antiquarian's practiced fingers immediately located the hidden lever that arrested the escapement with professional efficiency. Captain Hartwell, impatient with mechanical subtleties, simply seized the pendulum with military directness. Reginald Ashworth fumbled nervously with the winding key until the mechanism stuttered to a halt, his relief palpable. Mrs. Constance Ashworth observed the others with calculating intelligence before producing a hairpin and inserting it precisely to block the balance wheel, a solution that spoke of careful observation and adaptive thinking. Lady Vivian demurred entirely, claiming ignorance of mechanical devices, though Poirot noted her fingers trembled slightly as she spoke. "Merci," Poirot said, setting the clock running again. His keen gaze had catalogued not merely the methods employed, but the confidence, hesitation, and revealing competence each person displayed. "You see, Inspector, how character expresses itself through action. Our murderer required intimate knowledge of clockwork mechanisms throughout this house, knowledge that demanded both familiarity and systematic planning." Moving to the brandy service, Poirot inhaled delicately from the used glass. "No medicinal odor here," he murmured. "The chloroform scent concentrates near the destroyed timepiece, not where Sir Montague would have consumed his final drink. Our murderer created atmospheric evidence to mislead, not to kill." He produced the brass key discovered beneath the carpet, its surface bearing the oil stains of unpracticed manipulation. "This key belongs to no household lock, but to a timepiece mechanism, evidence that someone searched within the Breguet clock's housing. For what purpose? Perhaps for documents that would expose its fraudulent authentication." Mr. Pemberton shifted uncomfortably. "Sir Montague intended to announce my favorable assessment publicly, yet my actual findings would have revealed the piece as an elaborate forgery. The financial implications would have been catastrophic. He had leveraged other acquisitions against this timepiece's supposed value." "Exactly," Poirot continued, his voice hardening with certainty. "Someone discovered your true assessment before the planned announcement. Someone who realized that Sir Montague's public humiliation would create opportunities for those he had systematically oppressed." The psychological pressure in the room intensified as Poirot's analysis struck home. "Our murderer is not one who acts from sudden passion, but from calculated intelligence. They constructed an elaborate theatrical performance, complete with impossible locked rooms and supernatural timing. They are proud of their cleverness, delighting in the intellectual challenge of baffling detection." His gaze swept the assembled suspects with unnerving precision. Yet pride breeds carelessness. The stopped clocks were meant to suggest divine intervention, but they reveal instead a mind obsessed with temporal precision, someone for whom the exact moment of death held particular significance. The systematic manipulation of every timepiece in the house speaks of methodical planning and mechanical knowledge. Near the fireplace, Poirot indicated a partially burned fragment bearing yesterday's date. Someone attempted to destroy documentary evidence, perhaps your preliminary authentication report, Mr. Pemberton. Yet their efforts were incomplete, betraying haste despite careful planning. Mrs. Constance Ashworth stepped forward with sudden resolution, her intelligent features set in lines of grim determination. Monsieur Poirot, there are aspects of this case that require private discussion. The request surprised everyone present, but Poirot recognized the voice of someone prepared to make crucial revelations. As the others filed out with obvious reluctance, he reflected that the psychological game had begun in earnest. The murderer's theatrical soul, so carefully concealed behind elaborate deceptions, was finally ready to take center stage. The afternoon shadows lengthened, and somewhere in the house, a clock began to chime the hour with mechanical indifference to human drama. Mrs. Constance Ashworth closed the library door with deliberate precision, her intelligent features bearing an expression of grim resolution that spoke of decisions long contemplated and finally embraced. The afternoon light filtering through the mullioned windows cast her shadow across the fallen Breguet clock, creating an almost theatrical tableau that would have amused Sir Montague had he been alive to witness it. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of her revelation, "I believe you understand that my husband's weakness has made him vulnerable to forces beyond his comprehension. Last evening I took certain actions to protect him from public humiliation." Poirot regarded her with the patient attention he reserved for confessions that promised to illuminate rather than conclude his investigations. "You speak of protection, madame, yet I observe that you possess intelligence far exceeding your husband's capabilities. Indeed, which is why I overheard Mr. Pemberton's private conversation with Sir Montague before dinner. The Breguet clock was not merely a forgery, it contained something far more valuable than its supposed authenticity." Her composure never wavered as she continued. Sir Montague had discovered documents hidden within the clock's mechanism, papers that would expose a rival collector's fraudulent dealings and financial ruin. "Ah," Poirot murmured, his eyes sharpening with professional interest. The systematic destruction of the timepiece was not rage, but methodical searching. Precisely. Sir Montague intended to use Mr. Pemberton's authentication as prelude to revealing these hidden documents, destroying someone's reputation while securing his own financial advantage. I realized that such a revelation would create opportunities for those he had systematically oppressed. Mrs. Ashworth moved to the mantelpiece, her fingers tracing the carriage clock's mechanism with surprising familiarity. "I stole Mr. Pemberton's preliminary assessment from his case and attempted to burn it in the library fireplace. The fragment you discovered was evidence of my haste, not my success. You entered the library after Sir Montague's death. I slipped in during the confusion following the crash, hoping to destroy evidence that would have exposed the clock's fraudulent nature. Sir Montague was already dead, the timepiece destroyed, and I saw a sealed envelope addressed to his solicitor that had been on the central table earlier. It had vanished, presumably taken by whoever had searched the clock's mechanism." Before Poirot could respond, urgent footsteps echoed in the corridor, followed by Matthews the butler's agitated voice calling for assistance. They hastened toward the guest wing, where a small chamber had been assigned to Mr. Pemberton. The door stood ajar, revealing the antiquarian collapsed beside his open valise, his spectacles askew and breathing shallow but steady. The familiar, sweet medicinal odor hung thick in the air. Chloroform, administered with amateur enthusiasm rather than lethal intent. On the bedside table sat Pemberton's travel alarm clock, its hands stopped precisely at 9:47, the winding key protruding awkwardly with oil stains that spoke of unpracticed manipulation. "Not dead," Poirot observed, kneeling beside the unconscious man. "Merely rendered insensible by someone who feared his testimony. Open the windows immediately, but avoid creating drafts. Inspector Morrison arrived with characteristic bluster. Caught destroying evidence, no doubt. Someone feared what Pemberton might reveal about the authentication. Perhaps, Poirot replied, examining the travel alarm with meticulous attention. Yet observe the theatrical signature. Our murderer cannot resist repeating their temporal motif. The stopped clock, the precise timing, the elaborate staging designed to suggest supernatural intervention. Pemberton's valise had been thoroughly searched, its contents scattered across the floor. Among the disordered papers, Poirot discovered a torn corner of heavy cream paper bearing a solicitor's embossed crest, the missing piece that would complete the fragment rescued from the library fireplace. As Pemberton began to stir, his first coherent words were a mumbled reference to altered palettes and hidden mechanisms. When his eyes focused on Poirot, he whispered urgently, "My complete report. Someone has taken it. The documents I found within the clock's housing. They proved Sir Montague's involvement in systematic art fraud spanning decades." "Who visited you here, monsieur?" Pemberton struggled to focus his thoughts. "Someone knocked, claimed to have questions about the authentication. I opened the door and then—" He gestured helplessly at the chloroform-soaked cloth that lay beside him. Poirot reflected that the case had evolved beyond simple murder into something far more complex. A web of financial fraud, hidden documents, and systematic revenge that had culminated in elaborate theatrical deception. The attack on Pemberton confirmed that someone still feared exposure, despite Sir Montague's death having seemingly resolved the immediate threat. The murderer's psychological need for temporal precision and dramatic staging was becoming their greatest vulnerability, each repeated signature bringing Poirot closer to understanding the mind behind the impossible crime at Ashworth House. As the medicinal fumes gradually cleared from Pemberton's chamber, Poirot's attention fixed upon a detail that had escaped notice during the initial confusion. The antiquarian's travel alarm clock, positioned deliberately beside his bed with its hands frozen at 9:47, bore the same oil smears on its winding mechanism that he had observed throughout Ashworth House. Yet these were not the careless marks of an amateur, but the precise residue left by fingers accustomed to handling delicate clockwork with professional competence. "Most illuminating," Poirot murmured, examining the small brass key he had discovered beneath the library carpet. Unlike the household keys that hung from Sir Montague's ring, this was a specialized instrument designed for accessing the internal mechanisms of complex timepieces. Its surface bore traces of the same fine oil that marked the stopped clocks, suggesting recent and systematic use by someone intimately familiar with horological craftsmanship. Returning to the library, Poirot knelt once more beside the destroyed Breguet clock, his trained eye cataloguing details that had been obscured by the dramatic nature of the scene. The damage pattern revealed methodical dismantling rather than violent destruction. Someone had known precisely where to strike, which components to remove, and how to access the hidden compartment that Pemberton had mentioned. The scattered gears and springs told the story of a search conducted with mechanical knowledge that far exceeded casual familiarity. Near the fireplace, he discovered additional evidence of the searcher's haste. A fragment of sealing wax, flattened as though pressed by thread, clung to the Persian carpet's edge. More intriguing still was a hair-fine filament of black silk that had caught on the door's carved molding, expensive thread of the quality used in ladies' needlework, yet positioned at shoulder height where no feminine pursuit would logically place it. The sweet, medicinal odor that lingered in the room revealed itself under closer examination to be more complex than simple chloroform. Beneath the ethereal pungency lay a fainter, almost metallic note that reminded Poirot of the specialized cleaning agents used in the restoration of antique timepieces. Someone had deliberately created atmospheric evidence to suggest medical intervention, yet their choice of chemicals betrayed familiarity with horological rather than pharmaceutical applications. Inspector Morrison's renewed confidence in Dr. Thornfield's guilt prompted Poirot to examine the guest registry that Matthews maintained in the entrance hall. Each signature revealed characteristic personality traits through penmanship. Captain Hartwell's military precision, Reginald Ashworth's nervous scrawl, Dr. Thornfield's abbreviated medical script. Yet it was the elegant flourishes of one particular hand that caught his attention, displaying the kind of educated penmanship taught at exclusive finishing schools, combined with a precise control that suggested familiarity with detailed mechanical work. "Matthews?" Poirot inquired of the butler. "The maintenance of Sir Montague's timepiece collection. This was accomplished entirely by the household staff." "Indeed, sir. His lordship was most particular about the daily winding ritual. Though I confess, on several occasions I observed one of the family taking special interest in the mechanisms, asking detailed questions about their operation and maintenance." The implications crystallized in Poirot's mind as he returned to examine the library door's lock mechanism. The brass strike plate showed fresh scratches that spoke not of forced entry, but of careful manipulation by someone who understood the relationship between mechanical precision and theatrical misdirection. A barely perceptible groove in the door frame suggested the passage of fine thread, while minute traces of candle wax near the threshold indicated preparation that had required considerable planning and mechanical expertise. Most revealing was his discovery of a second brass key, this one wedged behind the mantelpiece carriage clock. Identical to the first, but bearing different oil stains that suggested it had been used to access multiple timepiece mechanisms throughout the house. Someone had systematically prepared every clock for simultaneous stopping, creating the supernatural illusion that had so effectively misdirected the initial investigation. As afternoon shadows lengthened across Ashworth House, Poirot reflected that the murderers' greatest strength, their theatrical imagination and mechanical competence, was simultaneously their greatest vulnerability. The stopped clocks, the elaborate staging, the careful manipulation of physical evidence all pointed toward a mind that could not resist the dramatic gesture, even when simplicity would have served their purpose more effectively. The attack on Pemberton had confirmed that crucial documents remained at stake. Documents that someone still feared might expose not merely Sir Montague's fraudulent dealings, but their own carefully concealed capabilities and long-harbored motives for revenge. The brass keys, the specialized oils, the precise mechanical knowledge required for such systematic deception, all suggested that Ashworth House harbored secrets that extended far beyond the obvious financial motivations that had initially appeared to drive the crime. Tomorrow, Poirot decided, he would gather all the suspects for a final demonstration that would restore both time and justice to their proper order. The following morning arrived with the peculiar stillness that precedes revelation, as though Ashworth House itself held its breath in anticipation of justice long delayed. Hercule Poirot had spent the dawn hours in solitary contemplation, arranging his evidence with the methodical precision that had made him legendary. The brass keys, the silk thread, the specialized oils, the partially burned documents, each piece formed part of an intricate mechanism that would soon restore both time and truth to their proper order. At precisely 10 o'clock, Poirot requested the attendance of all household members in the library, positioning each person with careful attention to their psychological relationship to the crime. The fallen Breguet clock remained where it had been discovered, its scattered components catching the morning light like mechanical witnesses to methodical destruction. "Mesdames, Messieurs," Poirot began, his voice carrying the quiet authority of absolute certainty. "We gather to resolve a mystery that has masqueraded as supernatural impossibility, yet was achieved through very human means. The crime committed in this room was not the work of sudden passion, but of elaborate preparation, executed by a mind that possessed both mechanical expertise and an irresistible appetite for theatrical drama." He approached the mantelpiece where the carriage clock sat frozen at 9:47. Our murderer created an illusion of divine intervention. Every timepiece in Ashworth House stopped at the precise moment of Sir Montague's death. Yet this apparent miracle was accomplished through systematic manipulation, requiring intimate knowledge of horological mechanisms and considerable advanced planning. Producing the 2 brass keys from his waistcoat pocket, Poirot continued with methodical precision. These specialized instruments were used to access the internal mechanisms of every timepiece in the house. Observe the oil stains, not casual marks left by amateur hands, but the precise residue of someone thoroughly familiar with clockwork maintenance. The sweet, medicinal odor that lingered here was not the agent of death, but atmospheric misdirection created by breaking Dr. Thornfield's missing chloroform ampule near the destroyed timepiece. Lady Vivian maintained her composed facade, though Poirot noted the slight tremor in her gloved hands. Captain Hartwell stood with military bearing, while Dr. Thornfield clutched his medical bag with obvious anxiety. The Ashworths sat together, Reginald's nervous energy contrasting with his wife's calculating intelligence. "Matthews?" Poirot called to the butler, who stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "Some weeks past, who among the family questioned you extensively about the winding and maintenance of Sir Montague's timepiece collection?" The poor butler's eyes moved with evident discomfort. "Her ladyship, sir. Lady Vivian asked detailed questions about the regulation of the long-case clocks, the proper oils for delicate mechanisms, and the location of specialized winding keys. She was most attentive to such matters." "Most illuminating," Poirot observed, his keen gaze cataloguing every subtle reaction. The destruction of the Breguet clock was not rage, but methodical searching. Someone sought documents hidden within its housing, papers that would have exposed not merely Sir Montague's fraudulent dealings, but systematic art fraud spanning decades. The searcher knew precisely where to strike, which components to remove, and how to access the concealed compartment. Moving to the door, Poirot indicated barely visible scratches on the strike plate. The locked room mystery was achieved through mechanical ingenuity rather than supernatural intervention. A fine thread of expensive silk, the same black thread missing from Lady Vivian's sewing basket, was used to manipulate the bolt mechanism from outside. The groove in the door frame and traces of candle wax near the threshold speak of preparation that required both patience and precision. The psychological pressure in the room intensified as Poirot's analysis struck home. Yet the most revealing aspect of this crime is its theatrical nature. Our murderer could not resist the drama of stopped time, the intellectual challenge of creating an impossible mystery, the artistic statement that Sir Montague's reign had ended at a moment of their choosing. Near the brandy service, Poirot paused significantly. Sir Montague entertained someone privately after dismissing the other gentleman, someone he trusted sufficiently to turn his back while examining his precious timepiece. Yet here lies the crucial revelation that transforms our understanding of this crime. Sir Montague was already dead when the elaborate theatrical performance began. A collective intake of breath rippled through the assembled company. The crash that summoned everyone to the library, the stopped clocks, the broken chloroform ampule, all were staged after the fact by someone who possessed both the mechanical knowledge to manipulate every timepiece in the house and the theatrical imagination to create a supernatural impossibility. His gaze swept the suspects with surgical precision. The attack on Mr. Pemberton yesterday confirmed that crucial evidence remained at stake. Someone still feared what his complete authentication report might reveal about hidden documents and systematic fraud. Yet they could not resist repeating their temporal signature, stopping Pemberton's travel alarm at 9:47, the same dramatic motif that had marked their masterpiece. Poirot straightened his waistcoat with characteristic precision, his eyes now fixed upon Lady Vivian with unwavering intensity. The murderer reveals themselves through character traits that demanded elaborate staging over simple efficiency. They possessed the mechanical knowledge gained through careful questioning of household staff, the access to specialized tools and oils, and most tellingly, the artistic temperament that could not resist transforming murder into theatrical performance. The morning light streaming through the mullioned windows illuminated faces bearing expressions of mounting tension and barely concealed anxiety. In the distance, a church bell began to chime the hour, its steady voice marking the approach of justice, long delayed but finally inevitable. "Tomorrow," Poirot announced with quiet finality, "I shall demonstrate precisely how this impossible crime was accomplished and reveal the identity of the person whose mechanical precision and theatrical vanity have created the most elaborate locked-room mystery of my career." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant ticking of a single clock that had escaped the murderer's methodical attention, its voice a reminder that time, however cleverly manipulated, ultimately serves the cause of truth. The promised demonstration commenced precisely as the morning light achieved its full strength, casting long shadows across the library of Ashworth House. Hercule Poirot stood with characteristic precision beside the fallen Breguet clock, his small figure commanding absolute attention from the assembled household. The theatrical moment had arrived to transform impossibility into methodical revelation. "Mesdames, Messieurs," Poirot began, his voice carrying the quiet authority of absolute certainty. "We have gathered to witness the restoration of both time and truth to their proper order. The crime committed in this room was not supernatural intervention, but human ingenuity applied with theatrical precision by someone who possessed both mechanical expertise and an irresistible appetite for dramatic performance. He produced a length of fine black silk thread, identical to that discovered on the door molding. The locked-room mystery that so confounded Inspector Morrison was achieved through this simple expedient. Observe." Moving to the door, Poirot demonstrated how the thread could be passed through the keyhole, manipulated to engage the bolt mechanism, then withdrawn completely, leaving no trace save microscopic fibers caught on the woodwork. The groove in the door frame, the traces of candle wax near the threshold. These speak of careful preparation and multiple rehearsals. Our murderer spent weeks perfecting this technique, guided by detailed knowledge of the door's mechanism obtained through systematic questioning of the household staff. Captain Hartwell stepped forward with military directness, but the crash that summoned us all, how was that accomplished if the room was truly locked? "Ah, mon capitaine, here we encounter the murderer's theatrical genius," Poirot replied with satisfaction. "The crash was not the sound of struggle, but of deliberate destruction. The Breguet clock was methodically dismantled after Sir Montague's death, its components scattered to suggest violence while concealing a systematic search for the documents hidden within its mechanism." Moving to the mantelpiece, Poirot indicated the carriage clock with its protruding winding key. The stopped timepieces throughout Ashworth House were not divine intervention, but mechanical manipulation requiring specialized knowledge and tools. These brass keys, he produced the evidence from his waistcoat, were used to access every clock's internal mechanism, adjusting them so that a single manipulation would arrest their function simultaneously at 9:47. Dr. Thornfield's professional curiosity overcame his anxiety. "But the cause of death, Monsieur Poirot, I found no obvious signs of violence or poisoning." "Because, mon docteur, you were examining a victim of one of the most subtle murder methods known to criminal science. Sir Montague died from precisely applied pressure to the carotid arteries, a technique that requires anatomical knowledge but leaves no obvious trauma. The murderer approached from behind, while he bent over his precious timepiece, applied pressure for perhaps 30 seconds, then released. Death appeared natural, resembling apoplectic fit or cardiac distress. Poirot's keen gaze swept the assembled suspects before fixing upon Lady Vivian with unwavering intensity. The sweet medicinal odor that lingered in this room was not the agent of death, but atmospheric misdirection. The broken chloroform ampule was deliberately shattered near the destroyed timepiece to suggest medical intervention and implicate Dr. Thornfield, whose financial desperation made him a convenient suspect. Lady Vivian maintained her composed facade, though her gloved hands trembled almost imperceptibly. "Your reconstruction is ingenious, Monsieur Poirot, yet surely you cannot prove such elaborate accusations." "Ah, but proof exists in abundance, madame," Poirot replied, producing a small leather portfolio. "The documents you secured from the Breguet clock's mechanism, papers proving not only your late husband's systematic art fraud, but your own intimate involvement in schemes that enriched you both while destroying others. I discovered them concealed within your jewelry case during this morning's search." The revelation struck the assembled company with devastating force. Mrs. Constance Ashworth's intelligence grasped the implications immediately. Lady Vivian feared exposure of her complicity in Sir Montague's fraudulent dealings. Precisely. Before her marriage, Lady Vivian possessed skills that proved invaluable to Sir Montague's art authentication schemes, the ability to age documents, replicate period inks, compose convincing provenance letters. She was not merely his wife, but his essential collaborator in systematic fraud spanning decades. Poirot continued with methodical precision. "Yesterday evening, Sir Montague intended to use Mr. Pemberton's authentication as prelude to exposing a rival collector's fraudulent dealings, using documents hidden within the Breguet's mechanism. Yet these papers would have implicated Lady Vivian as well, destroying the respectable identity she had so carefully constructed." Moving to the brandy service, Poirot indicated the used glass. "Sir Montague entertained his wife privately after dismissing the other gentleman, trusting her sufficiently to turn his back while examining his precious acquisition. She struck then, applying the pressure technique with surgical precision learned during her earlier association with a certain Parisian medical practitioner. The elaborate staging that followed, the locked room, the stopped clocks, the theatrical destruction of the timepiece, all served to create a mystery so compelling that investigators would focus on methodology rather than motive. Yet it was precisely this theatrical temperament, the need to transform simple murder into elaborate performance, that provided the psychological signature leading to exposure. Lady Vivian rose with dignity that would have been admirable in other circumstances. "And if your remarkable reconstruction is accurate, Monsieur Poirot, what then?" "Then justice resumes its natural course, madame, unimpeded by theatrical misdirection." Inspector Morrison stepped forward with obvious relief, though even now Poirot noted that Lady Vivian maintained her perfect composure. As the handcuffs closed around her wrists, she spoke with genuine emotion rather than calculated performance. "Montague destroyed everything he touched, Monsieur Poirot. Perhaps such destruction required an equally dramatic response." "Indeed, madame," Poirot replied with professional courtesy. "Yet in your quest for theatrical perfection, you forgot that time itself serves justice, not human vanity. The stopped clocks were magnificent stagecraft, but they could not arrest the inevitable progression toward truth." As Lady Vivian was led away, the distant sound of the grandfather clock resuming its ancient rhythm echoed through Ashworth House. Time, so cleverly manipulated in service of human deception, had finally restored its eternal witness to the triumph of methodical detection over theatrical impossibility. Poirot remained alone in the library for several minutes, contemplating the scattered remains of the Breguet clock. "It is always thus," he murmured, adjusting his mustache with characteristic precision. "We attempt to stop time in service of our desires, yet discover that truth possesses its own inexorable schedule, requiring neither our permission nor our applause." The room where time stopped had surrendered its secrets at last, and with them the restoration of both temporal order and eternal justice. The profound silence that followed Lady Vivian's arrest seemed to echo through Ashworth House like the aftermath of a theatrical performance, broken only by the distant, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the entrance hall. a sound that now reclaimed its rightful dominion over time itself. The assembled household stood frozen in a tableau of shock, relief, and lingering disbelief, each processing the revelation that their elegant hostess had orchestrated such elaborate deception. Inspector Morrison, returning from the arrangements, cleared his throat with obvious relief. "The mechanical aspects, Monsieur Poirot. You are certain of the thread technique?" "Entirely certain, Inspector," Poirot replied, producing the fine silk thread from his waistcoat. Lady Vivian rehearsed this method repeatedly during daylight hours, when such experimentation appeared innocent household maintenance. The groove in the doorframe, the traces of candle wax, these spoke of meticulous preparation spanning weeks, not spontaneous inspiration. He moved to examine the scattered components of the Breguet clock one final time. The destruction was not rage, but methodical searching. She knew precisely where the hidden documents were concealed, having helped Sir Montague place them there during their years of collaborative fraud. The sweet, medicinal odor was theatrical misdirection, chloroform broken deliberately to implicate Dr. Thornfield, whose financial desperation made him a convenient suspect. Dr. Thornfield, visibly sagging with relief, found his voice. "Then I shall not face charges for the missing chloroform. You will answer to your creditors, perhaps, but not to the gallows," Poirot assured him gently. "You made errors of judgment, not of blood, though I suggest revising your inventory procedures. Locks, not assumptions, mon docteur." A mild commotion in the corridor heralded Matthews's return, bearing a small leather pouch. "Found this, sir, lodged behind the cornice above the library shelves," he announced, offering it to Inspector Morrison. The pouch revealed a tiny screwdriver, wire probe, and specialized horological oils. Lady Vivian's complete toolkit for her temporal deceptions. "The final evidence of our theatrical murderess," Poirot observed with satisfaction. She prepared for every mechanical challenge except the one she could not govern, the inexorable progression of truth toward revelation. Captain Hartwell stepped forward with military directness. "And what remains for those who made poor choices long before last night? For some, there is redemption through honest acknowledgement," Poirot replied thoughtfully. "You will write to India, mon capitaine. You will make amends where possible. Do not mistake your survival for vindication. If you wish to be worthy of the years before you, waste none of them on yesterday's embers." Turning to the Ashworths, Poirot's expression softened with understanding. "The estate will be entangled temporarily. Fraud leaves knots that solicitors must patiently unpick. Yet I advise you, Mrs. Ashworth, as the true steward of your household. Pay the debts, sell what is gaudy and ill-gotten, keep what is modest and real." His gaze shifted to Reginald with gentle firmness. "And you will cease gambling with money, while your wife ceases gambling with fire. Burning papers is the pastime of fools. Order is the ally of the innocent." As the morning formalities concluded, Lady Vivian was brought past under escort. Her voice, when she spoke, carried genuine emotion rather than calculated performance. "You are right about time, Monsieur Poirot. It comes for us all, but I chose the moment." "You chose the curtain cue, madame," Poirot replied with professional courtesy. "Do not mistake it for authorship. Time serves truth, not human vanity." She inclined her head with dignity that would have been admirable in other circumstances, then was gone. The door closed with the quiet certainty of a verdict. On the gravel sweep, Poirot paused to adjust the entrance hall's long case clock, which resumed its dignified ticking with mechanical indifference to human drama. "You see," he murmured to Inspector Morrison, "even when one clock is stopped, another remembers how to continue. It is the nature of time and of truth." As his hired motor car wound through Surrey lanes toward London, Poirot reflected on the case that had tested his legendary powers through its combination of mechanical ingenuity and psychological complexity. The room where time stopped had been not merely a physical space, but a psychological one, Sir Montague had halted the progress of many lives, and in turn, his own time was stopped by a hand he had perhaps underestimated too long. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the English countryside, and in his pocket notebook, Poirot made a final entry. The theatrical criminal mistakes complexity for cleverness, yet truth requires neither stage nor audience, only patience, precision, and the inexorable passage of time that serves no master save justice itself. Behind him, Ashworth House grew small against the winter sky, its clocks once more obedient to the hour, its stories once more answerable to eternal truth.